Welcome to Wednesday, April 15th edition of Mark Madness. Today we're going to conclude Mark chapter 6. So we're going to read Mark 6:45 to the end of the chapter. And I want to point out a couple of things as you read the passage. So I encourage you to stop, take a moment right now to read 6:45 to the end of the chapter, and then come back, and there's a couple of things that I want to point out, and then I'll encourage you to read the passage again. As you look at the beginning, it's interesting what Jesus does. Coming off the feeding of the 5,000, one of the first things he does is to go by himself to pray. We see this in verse 46. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. It was so important for Jesus to take these moments to get away from the crowds, to even get away from the 12 disciples, to pray, to reconnect with his Father, to be empowered for ministry. If you're walking through our 40-day journey with Dietrich Bonhoeffer, you'll see on YouTube or on Facebook today that I've posted a video about how Bonhoeffer thinks of prayer. And I encourage you to take a few minutes to look at that video, because I think the thoughts that I have on prayer there are applicable to the thoughts that I would say here on prayer. Simply put, Jesus found it necessary to pray. We should find it necessary to pray. As the story continues, the disciples are in a boat and Jesus is going to approach them. Mark writes in verse 47, later that night, a boat was in the middle of the lake and he was alone on the land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them walking on the lake. He was about to pass them by. And then it continues into verse 49. That phrase, pass them by, is another connection to the Old Testament. You remember that time when Moses is on Mount Sinai and he says, God, reveal to me your glory. I want to see you. And God says, you can't handle my glory, man. You just can't do it. But Moses, this I'll do for you. Hide in the cleft of the rock and my glory will pass me by and you'll just get a glimmer of who I am. That's the same language used here, that Jesus is going to pass them by. And a Jewish reader would think, that reminds me of God passing by Moses. Again, what's Mark doing? He's answering the question, who is Jesus? And then as Jesus interacts with them in verse 50, they see him and they kind of freak out. And Jesus says, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. That phrase, it is I, is Jesus saying, I am. Take courage, I am. Don't be afraid. That again connects us back to Moses, the burning bush episode where Moses says, God, give me your name. How am I supposed to know tell the Israelites in Egypt who sent me? And God says, I am. And that becomes the divine name. And so I'm going to link to a Bible Project video that talks about the divine name today. And it'll be interesting for you to watch that. But when Jesus uses that, he's clearly saying, I am the I am. I am God. Again, Mark is revealing Jesus' identity. The last thing I want you to see is in verse 51 and 52, the disciples don't understand who Jesus is at this point. After all they've seen and all they've experienced, they still don't fully understand Jesus, and they don't know how to respond to him properly. I think Mark would ask us the question, do we understand Jesus? After all that's been revealed about Jesus, do we really understand who he is? And if so, have we embraced him? And have we responded to him appropriately? That's an important question to consider.